You trade the discomfort of action for the warm comfort of imagining your perfect life. Standing still feels like moving forward. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the architecture of the unconscious mind. Deep down, it's a subtle betrayal. You sense time passing, but the friction of self-confrontation feels suffocating. In that haze, your best days shrink behind polite excuses, replaced by private fantasies of a future self. In memories, dreams, reflections, this thinker captures the split between dreaming and awakening. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. That distinction lands with quiet force. Looking outward is safe. You build new versions of yourself in your head, while reality holds its breath. Stillness mimics progress, at least for a while. You curate versions of yourself as if that activity is change itself, always rehearsing, never auditioning. But here's the complication. The fantasy grows sticky. Sketching dreams is easy, slippery, nearly addictive. It spares you the risks of disappointment. No one can mock or reject a life you've never shared. The distance between who you are and who you could be becomes a feat. Shame begins to creep in around the edges, a chronic low-level anxiety that something essential is slipping by unclaimed. In the undiscovered self, this thinker exposes the haunting cost of not venturing inward. The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Few people realize the price paid for endless internal rehearsal. The mind, given nowhere to go, circles the same unresolved doubts. Negative certainty takes hold. What if my effort proves insufficient? What if rejection is final? It is often simpler to shape imaginary victories than to risk even a small, real defeat. The mechanism is self-protection, coded into bone. Your body tenses. You scroll your phone past other people's triumphs to numb the flash of envy. Their risks mirror your own paralyzed ambitions. Fear feeds this inertia. Not just fear of external judgment, the crowd's laughter or silence, but a deeper terror. What if you never quite become the person you pretend to be? What if all the daydreams only sharpen the ache of not acting? This is the wound that stings in the dark, unmistakable once named. The longer you avoid making contact with your real motives, your actual longing, the thicker the insulation between dream and action becomes. Opportunity then decays into habit, and habit becomes its own quiet grave. Cultures throughout history have built entire rites around transformation, but modern inertia offers a false ritual, the rehearsal without the risk. Ancient initiations demanded ordeal and sacrifice, a recognition that the person you might become can only be earned through discomfort, not fantasized into existence. The modern version is gentler, but in its softness, it smothers urgency. You window shop your own potential, trying identities on in private, a method that yields zero change in public. There's real damage here. By staying stuck in the pre-action phase, you trade the friction of fear for reassurance, but the cost compounds. You lose authenticity because you never invite the world to see your real, imperfect expression. You lose resilience, as nothing tests your false beliefs or tempers your hopes with reality. The taste of unrealized potential grows sharper with age. You may find that over time, the very fantasies that once soothed you become sources of agitation, reminders of roads not taken. This tightening spiral is invisible in the moment. It is only years later that the absence of transformation becomes impossible to ignore. There is no drama to this loss. only the silent subtraction of possibility day by day. No external event signals it. Instead, you wake again and again as the same unfinished character. Reality never rises to meet the self you rehearsed, and in that gap, longing curdles to regret. The only way out is through the discomfort of awakening, risking exposure to yourself first. That means letting go of daydreams as evidence of change and daring to test even your smallest convictions. The mind revolts, the body resists. But every meaningful transformation begins not with imagining, but with a concrete, sometimes awkward step toward what's feared. To avoid this is to live only halfway, visiting your real life like a stranger, never settling into its streets. Let's drop the idea that time alone resolves this tension. People wait for clarity, but clarity never arrives under soft light. It comes only from the collision between unconscious habits and immediate experience. Here's when it gets raw. You try to stand as your truest self and realize you don't know how. Old instincts blur your vision. Each automatic move feels like a betrayal and a cliché, yet you keep doing them, sometimes compulsively. You catch yourself acting out roles written in childhood or fear, unable to trace their origins. The challenge hardens now. Inside, doubt asks, if I'm not this, then what am I? That's the sting. A life lived with the funnel narrow, every new possibility filtered through obsolete scripts. You claim you control your story, but you turn the pages blind. In Ion, he confronts the dark matter beneath the self. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. The shock isn't that your patterns run deep. It's that, left unexamined, they masquerade as destiny itself. Pause. You're not doomed, but you are implicated. The blame game, family, fortune, timing, crumbles, and what's left is exposure, the unbearable fact that nothing changes if you don't. There are moments, stark in memory, when reality punctures the armor. Someone calls you out, or you hear yourself speak and recoil at the script. These are not tragedies. These are glimpses, volatile and sharp, of what's actually steering you. Now the real problem. The conscious mind craves simplicity, but the roots tangled below crave to remain hidden. You want agency so badly, but recoil from the excavation that would grant it. The turning point isn't a sunrise, it's a rupture. Here is the memorable line. The risk of self-knowledge is that every door you unlock, you must decide if you will walk through. This is panic and liberation at once. If fate is a disguise, then agency is risk, raw, daily, unending. Maybe this is why avoidance feels safer than the pain of confronting your honest, unevolved self. Any real awakening, no matter how small, costs you the comfort of blaming fate and earns you the burden of choosing. Dragging the unconscious into daylight is not a one-time awakening. It's a discipline of relentless interruption, catching yourself in the act, halting the script, testing a new move. Otherwise, the idea of change becomes another fantasy, woven into the same net that traps you. Look sharply. The choice isn't between comfort and pain, but between mirage and possibility. Even in defeat, there can be relief. Now you know the battle. This is the brutal requirement of a life actually lived. Subtract excuses, and you're left staring at possibility. Terrifying, but yours. In alchemical studies, this confrontation with the self comes into focus. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. That's not the call people want to answer. Turning inward means laying hands on raw nerves, not just daydreams. The turning point splits comfort from truth. Suddenly, the world becomes less predictable, your self-image less stable, but denial only keeps the wound wet. The old patterns never argue. They just tighten their grip, quietly, every time you flinch away from discomfort. Standing still, you sacrifice potential for routine. You begin to sense what is at stake, not minor adjustments, but the very coordinates of your life. This thinker's warning becomes command. There's no rescue from outside. The work is solitary, unglamorous, persistent. Look at real-world cracks in the narrative. The executive who sabotages friendships for control and tells herself it's ambition. The lover who mistrusts everyone, blaming old betrayals every time intimacy dissolves. Each script feels like logic, but really, it's camouflage. Fear wearing the mask of certainty. If it were just about change, the slogans would have worked by now. Instead, every so-called transformation recreates the original story. Only by hunting your own reflexes, exposing the shape of your ache, do you unlock another ending. The darkness doesn't leave when ignored. It festers, dictating terms you can't see until you bleed by them. When you commit to consciousness, you burn the blueprint and draw with trembling hands. There's a historical echo in this. Rituals of confession, rites to air the hidden, have always marked shifts in human worlds. Ancient mystery schools dragged initiates through night's terrors before promising rebirth. Nothing easy, nothing sentimental. The test was whether you could meet the thing you'd banished from your story. Sometimes change looks like loss, and often it leaves scars. But avoiding the descent only dooms you to repetition. If you don't interrupt the script, you repeat the role your ancestors wrote: the coward, the cynic, the exile. The wisdom traditions didn't offer comfort. They promised survival by knowing the dark map inside you. The ones who walked out changed had dirt under their nails, not halos. Internally, this fork is hardwired. The unconscious protects itself with stories of safety. I am not at fault. I cannot help it. Those stories bend reality, but never kill pain. Beneath them, the true force is fear. Terror of being seen. Terror of being responsible for your own suffering. That dread fuels projection, rationalization, failure to act. It isn't enlightenment people fear. It's the possibility that everything known was just captivity. So they cling to the familiar ache, calling it fate, demanding rescue from an enemy outside. But that illusion only numbs the heart. The wreckage is subtle, but total. Moments unlived, connections thin. The self shrunk to ritual complaint. Without this shift, you lose more than a fantasy of comfort. You lose any honest stake in the terms of your own existence. The cost across decades is staggering. Possibility shrinks. Everything becomes a rehearsal for the same disappointment. The world seems smaller, other people flatter. You lose richness in exchange for repetition, trading the discomfort of truth for the quiet poison of habit. This thinker, in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, throws the last torch into the darkness. Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Clarity isn't a promise of ease, it's the aftermath of surrendering illusion. Only there do you see your motives, wounds, and capacity naked, yours to claim or discard. This is the moment when a new life becomes possible, not by magic, but by raw attention. From here, the closing thought becomes obvious. A life kept in shadow costs more than any pain returned by the light. A life kept in shadow costs more than the pain returned by the light. Embracing clarity invites personal transformation and deeper understanding. If this resonated with you, subscribe to the channel and comment below. What truths are you ready to face?